Our team coverage of the Republican National Convention continues on local reaction on the biggest announcement to come out of Wisconsin so far. Ohio Senator J.D Vance being Donald Trump's VP pick, and we're getting local reaction on how Western Mass voters feel about the former president's choice. And Western Mass News reporter Wesley Days joins us live in studio with more from voters. Wesley, looking at this from a historical perspective, Vance hasn't always been Trump's biggest cheerleader.
No, Abby, you can go as far as saying he was one of his biggest critics. The one-time and one-term senator from the Buckeye State may be the Republican Party's latest superstar, but can he advance the party if his past comes back to bite?
I'm definitely not going to vote for Trump.
Wait a minute.
I have the vision and the agenda aligned with President Trump to make the American worker better off, to bring peace to the world, and to actually advance an agenda that's good for American citizens.
He's the Republican Party's symbol for the next generation. As J.D. Vance looks to lead them to the future, his past is currently in the present. But does it matter?
You know, I think that shows that there's room for growth here on the Trump train.
To Western Mass Republican delegate Cecilia Calabrese, it doesn't.
I think that shows that J.D. Vance was able to kind of come around to educate himself, to learn more about Donald Trump. And I think it sets an incredible example for people who in the past may have considered themselves never Trumpers, and now they're going to be voting for Donald Trump.
Calabrese may not be the only Republican that agrees, but across the aisle, there's a different tone. Some think it's all a game.
Not surprised whatsoever. I mean, clearly Republicans will say whatever they need to get power and to get, influence.
One woman tells Western Mass News she bought Vance's best-selling memoir. She's ready to put it deep in her bookshelf.
I find it really, ironic that he is a Republican and now a Trump lover, given that he himself was the beneficiary of a lot of help from various institutions.
Well, Trump and Vance will make their case to the public why they deserve 4 years at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You can catch some of that coverage right here on the networks of Western Mass News. As Abby just mentioned, there's a lot of people speaking tonight. Even former President Trump's ex or sister or daughter-in-law, excuse me, I got all wrapped up there. Lara Trump will be speaking tonight as well. Savannah Chrisley, a lot of big names from the Republican Party will be there in attendance in Milwaukee. You don't want to miss that. Reporting live in studio, Wesley Days, Western Mass News.
Thank you.